Instead of the four legislators making individual presentations, we're going to let them just talk as a panel for simplicity and because they have such good rapport. We ask that they include in their remarks what legislation was passed this session, what did not pass, and why. And finally, their hopes for the next session. Now I'll introduce all four. Senator Liz Lovelet. Our 40th District Senator is Liz Lovelet. She is from Anacortes, where she had served on the City Council for 5 years. She was appointed last year to the Senate seat vacated by Kevin Ranker, then elected in November, and is now running for re-election to a 4-year term. In Olympia, Senator Lovelet serves on the Local Government Committee, the Transportation Committee, and as Vice Chair of the Senate Energy, Environment, and Technology Committee. Representative Deborah Lekanoff lives in Bow. She has served as Governmental Affairs Director for the Swinomish Tribal Community over 20 years. In 2018, Representative Lekanoff was elected as State Representative, Position 1, to replace the retiring Chris Litton, and is now running for her second term. She serves on the House Capital Budget Committee, the Rural Development, Agricultural, and Natural Resources Committee, and as Vice Chair of the House Environment and Energy Committee. She also co-chairs the Joint Legislative Task Force on Water Supply. Representative Alex Rammel. He lives in Bellingham, where he worked on affordable housing as chair of the Culshan Land Trust and for environmental stewardship with Stand Earth. Break in if I say something wrong. He was appointed to fill the seat vacated by Jeff Morris January 6th and is now running to be elected to the position. He is serving on the Housing Committee, the Community Development and Veterans Committee, and the Commerce and Gaming Committee. Representative Dave Paul. He lives in Oak Harbor in the 10th Legislative District and was Vice President of Institutional Planning and Effectiveness at Skagit Valley College for many years. South Fidalgo Island is part of his district. He successfully defeated the Republican Dave Hayes in 2018 to serve his first term in the State House. Representative Paul serves on the Transportation Committee, the College and Workforce Development Committee, and the Education Committee. He is now running for re-election to the seat. Good evening, Representative Paul.
Hi, folks.
Legislative panel. So I'll now turn the meeting over to the four legislators to discuss the last session. You may talk as you wish as a group.
So this is Deborah. So you have to excuse me. I'm cooking dinner and do this at the same time. Most of us understand as parents, that's what we want to do. I want to be respectful to Senator Lovelet. This is your backyard, Senator. Anacortes is your backyard. Can we have you open up our panel for us tonight?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So proud to be here again with my seatmates. We've been doing a whole lot of COVID-related response calls with the community. I think we've done, boy, between the town halls and those conversations, I think the one that we're having on Saturday will be about our 6th. So really trying to be here and present and answering questions. And welcome to Representative Paul. Always lovely to see you here with the Fidalgo Democrats. So this has been, you know, the first 58 days of session, I think were quite different than the last couple. We all had work that we managed to get to the finish line, some of which had fiscal notes that were either vetoed or reduced, and that was just kind of the way it needed to be for us to do the response effort that we need. Lots of good co-sponsored bills in the 40th District. We had a lot of bills that were running on parallel tracks through both chambers in order to really get the work done. Personally, my victories for the year were around opening access to solar. So one of them is a program called CPACER, which we'll hopefully start rolling out with the counties here fairly soon. Expanding access to community solar, although again, a lot of that ended up getting it was necessary to implement the budget, but took a pretty significant haircut getting out of the governor's office. So I think there was so much collaboration this year, and especially in a short session where you just really have a very constrained amount of time to get stuff done. I feel like there was a lot more cohesion. Disappointments for the year definitely are around some environmental bills, low carbon fuel standards, and others that were heavy lifts that we're going to have to come back and keep working on in the coming session. So with that, I'll turn it over to my fellow representatives and wait for some questions.
Deborah, should we let you go while you're not stirring?
Thank you, Alex. And I'll be, I know we've got some great questions coming on this evening. I have to tell you, to the 40th, for the 40th and the 10th, I can't tell you how important it was for me to be able to understand that I think you've created a dream team. We were in a conversation with Brenda, and we were in a conversation with Corinne at one point when she looked at Alex and Liz, and I looked and thought of Dave and thought of Sharon and said, we've got a dream team that's really looking at the values of the 40th and understanding how to implement environmental decisions into every prosperous decision that needs to be done in Washington State, whether we're protecting the environment, creating jobs, creating workforce development, investing in education, investing in labor, and investing in those situations such as childcare in our communities and outreach on healthcare. We did it together. It was great to look down the aisle at Alex and see a smile and know that I wasn't so alone. And I knew that I had a great person and a great partner to look across the aisle and look up to Dave and see Dave standing up and saying, education is the root of building workforce for Washington State, and always carrying that integrity and strong decisions. Liz, we're so grateful to have you in the Senate, to run across the rhododendron and come over and see Liz notice us in the aisle, come running over and say, what's going on? What can we do? Or to get a text from her on the phone and say, hey, I've got derelict vessel bill that needs to be pushed through. Hey, Deb and Alex and Dave, what can we better do to do that? You've got a great team, and the 40th created that, and I'm so thankful. We had a great win-win, and I think one of the things we want to talk about later on today was the bipartisan decision we made on $175 million for the COVID virus. Just to give you guys an update, of that $175 million, I think this is, all of you will feel happy to know the Department of Health and Local Health had 20 million allocated towards it. UW testing got 10 million. DSHS surge capacity got 19.5 million. Commerce got 23 million. HCA Rural Hospital Emergency Fund had 2 million. Department of Health, Local Health, which is important to us, is 30 million. The tribes received 5 million, and I can speak to that a little bit later. And Department of Ag and Food got 10 million. We still have another 6 million out there projected to be allocated, but I think your dream team of the 40th, our friends in the 10th, and our friend in the 42nd, our little sister, Sharon Shoemake, the professor, is really helpful to be part of our team, and we appreciate it. So I'm going to stop there, take questions later. We've got a lot of work to do, and I'm really excited to be part of the folks sitting here at this table with me. So with that, Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, Alex, Representative Rammel.
Alex is fine. I haven't gotten into the titles yet. So I think many of you know I got started about a week before the beginning of the legislative session. And so some of my reflections are just about what it actually is to be a state representative and how the institution works. And one thing I think I knew going in, but I know in a much more visceral way and really just want to emphasize is how important it is to have friends there. And I think you all are well served in a team of friends working together in the 40th district and having friends up in the 42nd, like Sharon Shoemake, and in the 10th, like Dave Paul. And we hope to have more friends in those districts going in next year. And I would also just emphasize that it may even be more important that our legislative assistants all work really well together as well. And that's an important part of that teamwork too. I know that they're in touch with each other many times every single day, just coordinating and divvying up the work because there's more than any one person can get done. I will just mention a couple of things in terms of policy stuff. The two things I think many of you have heard me talk about as sort of my top priorities going into the legislative session are housing and climate. And I think we have a really good story to bring back and tell you on housing. When I was working on elections, this is the number one thing on people's minds going door to door. And it's something that people brought up to me every single day in the Capitol building. Washington State is really in a housing crisis, and the legislature responded. We took important action to protect tenants, requiring landlords to accept payment plans for things like security deposits, those upfront entry barriers to make it easier for folks to get into homes. We gave tenants in mobile home parks the right of first refusal if that property goes up for sale, so that they can protect the land under the home that they own. We worked hard in the budget on housing. The Housing Trust Fund is some of the most important money we're spending in Washington State to build homes that will stay affordable in perpetuity. The legislature a year and a half ago had passed a historic level of funding for the Housing Trust Fund, and we added another $55 million to it at the interim. Building homes, building houses really is a top priority for the legislature this year, and keeping them affordable. We also funded 2,000 more spots for the Housing and Essential Needs program. That's money that keeps people who are right on the cusp of losing their housing situation, can help them get over that hump for 1 or 2 months. We spent $60 million, or committed $60 million, I should say, to shelter capacity grants to confront our homelessness challenges. And we passed legislation that gives local governments, or critical partners, the ability to raise resources through a sales tax incentive. Or sales tax for housing. So Anacortes, of course, just did that this year. Other cities, Skagit County as a whole, will be able to do that in the future without having to go to the people. It just takes a vote of the members of the city council or county commission. So those are some of the priorities that we hit on housing. I think we're all really proud of that work. On climate, unfortunately, the story is a little bit less exciting. We did some important things. Senator Lovelet led the charge, as she mentioned, on community solar, on financing for commercial energy upgrades. We did pass improvements in our goals for statewide action on climate change, and we did pass a zero emission electric vehicle legislation. But none of those are the big steps that we need if we're going to take the climate crisis as seriously as the scientists tell us we should. We unfortunately were not able to get the low carbon fuel standard across the finish line. I was especially excited about that because folks working at refineries can be assured that with a low carbon fuel standard, we know that there's a place for refinery work in the clean energy economy that we're trying to build, because there's a place in manufacturing and refining renewable fuels in the future. That's going to be a top priority for us coming back next year. There's more stuff on my list, but I will defer it until there's questions. The last thing I'll just mention, my sort of freshman bill. I introduced a piece of legislation that was drafted last year by Representative Sharon Shoemake and passed a scenic bikeways bill that barely squeaked through under the governor's veto pen this 2 weeks ago. And that creates a scenic bikeways program that'll encourage tourism and Washington's scenic and beautiful bike routes. With that, I will turn it over to Representative Dave Paul.
Thank you, Alex. Hey everybody, it's so nice to see you. So I'm downstairs in my basement because when we did this on Saturday, I had some internet connectivity issues. So apologize for the lighting, but hopefully you can hear me better. So it's really exciting to be here. I oftentimes tell this story, but the Fidalgo Island Democrats were the first group I visited when I was considering running a couple of years ago. And here we are. Great to be with Deborah and Alex and Liz on this team. A lot of talk about Sharon Shoemake in the 42nd. I think a lot of value in having folks that represent swing districts team up with folks from the 40th to accomplish goals for Skagit County and the broader Northwest region of the state. So the short session, it's for all four of us. The first time we've gone through that, they talk a lot about that, nothing quite like a 60-day session. For me personally, I think some of you know I got sick at the very end, the last week of the session, so I missed. So my session ended like on the 55th day and ended up spending the last few days at Island Hospital and then at Virginia Mason. So it's kind of strange that I missed that very end of the session, but we got a lot accomplished in the first 55 days where I was there. So on the Education Committee, we continued the work that we've done to help support students. Last year we got rid of that onerous graduation requirement with standardized tests, have better pathways for students to have not just have a standardized test to demonstrate that they've met the graduation requirements. This year we passed comprehensive sex education, sexual health education. I think you're going to see a lot of that discussed this November. I would appreciate your help making sure that we are communicating that doesn't teach kindergartners about how to use condoms. It's about providing age-appropriate education. So one of the things I'm really proud of on a bipartisan work that we did with folks on the Education Committee was carving out, making sure we made it clear that the curriculum for K3 is different than the curriculum from 4th grade on to 12th grade. So the K3 curriculum talks about social and emotional learning, talks about preventing abuse. We heard some gut-wrenching testimony from students that had been abused that did not know that what was happening to them by a stepfather was abuse. So I think that's really important that we help communicate that to our friends and neighbors this November, because I'm sure we're going to hear about it a lot. We talked a lot about climate change. We got an awful lot done last session. So I think this past session felt a little bit like a letdown, but we passed a dozen bills that were really important the previous session. We still have work to do to help protect the climate in the Northwest and to, like Alex was talking about with clean fuel standards, that communicating that actually will help our refinery workers, because we're going to be producing clean fuels that keep jobs in Anacortes rather than other plans that might shut down refineries, which I don't think any of us support at all. We want to make sure that we are using our refineries and our workers to make the cleanest fuels possible. So, I worked really hard to try to listen to what folks were concerned about and then advocate on their behalf and represent them well in the legislature. And a couple of things that we accomplished I'm really proud of. We got funding for the Anacortes Family Center. Alex and I teamed up with Senator Lovelett and Deborah, got that across the finish line. The year before, I was the prime sponsor on the sheriff radios that were critically important to help sheriff deputies reach the far corners of the county. So lots of good work that we're doing on higher education as well, helping to reduce student debt and helping to get folks to living wage jobs and to get there as soon as possible without student debt, and making sure that folks are thinking about apprenticeship programs and career technical programs, which I think is very valuable. So I will, in my remarks there, would really appreciate your help defending this seat this November. I'll be the #1 target of Republicans that want to flip back a seat. And I think that it's going to be a tough fight, but with your help, we can do it. So really appreciate your support and all the love I get from the Fidalgo Democrats, and I would love to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Representative Paul. So it feels like now we're ready to turn the meeting over for discussion, for questions. And you're welcome to make a comment as well as ask a question. And how we'll do this is at the bottom of your computer screen, you'll see a button called Participants. If you click on that, the list of participants who are signed in to the meeting appears on the right side of your screen. So if you have a question or comment for the legislators, find raised hand and click there. And a symbol of a hand appears in the order of the names of participants who raise their hands. And I will call on you while Brad highlights your picture and unmutes you. Then say your name if I haven't already said your name. Say which legislator the question is for, or whether it's for any of them. Usually it's for all of them. For simplicity, please just ask one question at a time. You can raise your hand again later if you have more. If there's an issue with your audio and you can't be heard, Zoom support will work with you off screen while we move on. And then you could raise your hand again later. So I see Andrea Dahl's got her hand up and looks like she's first.
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right. I didn't put myself on video because I'm trying to drink my wine at the same time.
Oh,
That's all right.
we don't get to see you drinking wine.
Well, this is originally for Liz, but anyone can jump in on it. All the goals that you have set were before the virus came on. And so now everything is quite different. And I wanted to ask, as I said, start with Liz, how she sees his adjustments, particularly in the budget and the money that's being set aside for climate change and other things that we're working so hard for.
Well, that's a great question, because that's what I want to be spending my interim working on. So some of the things that we're going to need to have available to us as we move into an uncertain future are tools to help augment public works projects, infrastructure projects, and those kinds of climate-oriented green jobs. And we're going to have to keep our eye focused on this opportunity to look at our tax code, to look at the way we view our kind of green economic development, and see if we can find ways to incorporate, in my opinion, carbon pricing with that lens in mind. I am hopeful, based on some conversations that I'm trying to have around finance options, how we can incorporate goals for a carbon economy into the kinds of job creation that we do, keeping in mind that we're not trying to be punitive to businesses that are already providing necessary products. So I think as we talk about low carbon fuel standards, or we talk about needing to rapidly deploy broadband across the state to make sure that our students have access to the information services that they're going to need, that those are ways that we can really take a full view of this moment in history, see what things are working for us and maybe what things are not working as well, and direct our energy and resources to creating some of the changes that I think we've long stymied for fear of crashing the economy. We're at a critical moment right now where I think we can turn that lens towards how we can be really positive and proactive in the kinds of job growth and environmental stewardship we want to do.
Thank you.
And I'll support Liz on that conversation of green infrastructure. I know Alex will probably talk a little bit about carbon crediting, but carbon infrastructure also. You know, the greening of our infrastructure building is going to be really important. Many of you saw the work that I did on GMA as vice chair of the environmental energy, and as my colleague in the Senate, also vice chair of environmental energy and technology. We'll be partnering up on finding pathways in which, if we're going to build infrastructure, which is part of the economic renewal and recovery that we'll be focusing on, how do we do that together? How do we build green culverts? How do we build green bridges? How do we take the road infrastructure and transportation and provide that opportunity to implement climate change aspects to it? I think it's important for us to remember as we start building and developing our future, we also don't want to be stuck in the same situation we are now today with 19 years of culvert cases for salmon recovery based on poor infrastructure that was done during that decision-making time of that period. Not to blame anyone for 19 to 17 years ago, but that was the science then. The great part is we get to say this is the science of today. And you've got good leaders such as Dave Paul, Liz, Alex, and Representative Shoemake, who are going to talk about what is it that we can better do to build that infrastructure baseline and foundation. We have the Growth Management Act, which also plays into a big discussion that Liz and I will be having at both of our committees in 2021. How do we better incorporate climate change into the mission and goals of the Growth Management Act, but how do we also incorporate net ecological gain into the conversation that replaces net ecological loss, which really reflects into salmon recovery and climate change in the future to come. Whereas we saw budget cuts this year, I think my colleagues and I to the north and to the east and to the south, up to Snohomish, will say we can do better. We can be stronger in building policy and regulations in incorporating programs. Budget cuts come and go. Policies can be long lasting. And I think with my colleagues with me, we can better build that together. I know Representative Shoemake and I know Representative Ramel have been talking a lot about carbon crediting and what we can better do to build that next layer of what Washington State can do to lead climate change across the nation, but also in the Pacific Northwest up to our friends in British Columbia. So I'll turn it over to Representative Ramel for that part of the discussion.
Sure. Well, and I think Representative Lukianoff and Senator Loveland nailed the legislative pieces, right? There's a lot of work to do. I would just point to there's also a psychological component to this, that we're all in a very different place than we were 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I think that tells us that we can do big things when we work together. And we can respond to an emergency. And I think a lot of us have been wondering, what's it take to respond to the emergency of climate change? And we've been very frustrated for a long time and wondering whether, as a society, we can pick up and do anything big anymore. And the answer is, yeah, we can, because we all have just done that. And I think there's a psychology to it, of working together. And I hope that will carry forward as well.
So I think one of the things that's really critical, I think, for us is looking forward, as we're rebuilding things, how can we do that in an equitable way? So it's very different of what many of us are going through from compared to our neighbors who might not have broadband, who might not have any easy time getting online access to their educational needs. And I think we can purposely now think about that at the K-12 level. We've seen quickly colleges pivot to the online model, both in terms of instruction, but also in terms of the service delivery. And there may be long-lasting ramifications that are good for our economy and good for our society because of that. We may not have the necessity to travel 5 days a week to your job. We've been talking about telecommuting for years. Well, now we're forced to do it. And I think most of us are anxious to get back face-to-face with our colleagues, but there may be opportunities to save on our infrastructure and save on energy costs and save on infrastructure costs at the institution that somebody's working at, the company they're working at, because they may need less office space and less facilities to manage that organization. I think a tribute to our predecessors that built up a strong rainy day fund, that's going to cushion part of this blow. But we're going to have to work closely. We're going to have to work across the aisle to figure out the best ways of building out the next budget to account for this economic downturn.
I don't see any other hands raised, but I know my friend Andrea. Oh, Rosemary, thank you. Rosemary Stevens, go ahead with your
I
question.
would just like to thank Dave Paul for the work that he's doing with sex education in the schools. It's very, very important, and it is often overlooked or ignored or spat upon. So I really think that's such an important thing. I was a teacher. The other thing was, I was wondering if anybody had any idea about what is being done to get computers to kids who have problems getting them. For example, on tribal lands, I don't know what that is like. I have a feeling that probably that's a problem. And this educational thing that we're going through now, we have to really hit the ground running with that and make sure these kids are getting the education they need.
So
I'm done.
I'll jump in for just a moment. Thank you for that good question. I'm not going to steal the thunder from Anacortes, and I'd love my senator to be able to share the great work that Anacortes is doing, but I know within the 40th, almost all of our youth have received computers that have been sent home, grade school all the way up to high school. I know my own daughter at 16 qualified to get a small hotspot to where she can have access to internet because she lives in a rural area at her dad's house. I believe that Washington State has been working really hard on addressing equality to make sure that not only do our urban areas who have good internet service and maybe perhaps stronger education districts provide outreach to the students, but we also are providing outreach to our rural communities and our low-income communities, and also our special ed and our disability. And that's been a really strong goal of both Senator Wellman, who's chair of the Education Committee in the Senate, and Representative Santos in the House. And not only are they working collaboration together on providing equality for education outreach at all levels of education, again, as I described earlier, but they're engaging at the federal level to make sure that Washington State gets their fair share of funding and support and programs. And they're all looking at what does long distance learning look like in the grade school and high school level, but also for college students. So I'll pause there and turn it over to my colleagues to share a few words.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of nervousness when the virus crisis started over switching to online learning. And we had State Superintendent Chris Reckdahl visited the Education Committee just in the last 10 days of the session. Very nervous about recommending switching to online learning. Well, that time came, and we've got to do it because we've got students who have access to all kinds of resources that are going to get ahead. And what part of our job is to get all of our students those resources so that we don't lose months or years of education. I think an advantage of the Washington State system is a great deal of local control, and local school districts know what their communities need. I think the greatest challenge for us is going to be special education, and there's just a range of services students need, and that is what gives me the most heartburn, that keeps me up at night, is how are we going to make sure that our students in special education are receiving the educational resources they need to have quality education. And that's the work I think the Education Committee, both in the House and Senate, is very interested in addressing this interim.
Okay, ready for the next question? I see Patty Santangelo's name is up. She's raised her hand.
Corinne,
Patty,
Um,
sorry.
yes, Alex?
I just put up what
Go ahead, Patty.
I just put up what my son is doing called Laptops for Learning, in which they will take in laptops, they will wipe them, they will refurbish them, and give it to students who need them. It's in the information's in the chat box.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Patty.
It's called Interpreting Technology is the business name in Burlington.
Do you want to give the phone number or anything? Or would you rather they go to the chat box? I don't know if they all know how to go to the chat box.
Number is
It-
0-419-5555. And it's Interpreting Technology on Fairhaven Street in Burlington, Washington. There's somebody there during the day, but there's only 2 people and you got to knock on the door to get their attention.
Okay, thanks, Patty.
Corinne,
Yes, Alex, you were going to say something.
Thanks, Corinne. Thank you, Patty. Thanks for sharing that. And Rosemary, thank you for your questions. It's good to see you. Haven't seen you for a while. I just wanted to pick up on the other part of what you had talked about and the importance of comprehensive sexual health education. And since we're talking to a group of Democrats, I want to make it especially clear the point that Representative Paul was making. He's in a race that's going to be targeted, and this is an issue that I think we know the Republicans intend to try and make a big deal out of, and have been trying to make a big deal out of. And what he said is exactly right. This isn't about teaching kindergartners how to use condoms. That's not what anybody would consider age appropriate. But that's not even the worst thing I heard said on the House floor that we were trying to do by introducing this bill. The Republicans are going to tell people blatantly false things to try and make folks angry. And one of the clearest things that made this stand out for me, my office got one phone call the day that we voted on that bill. Sharon Shoemaker lives half a dozen blocks from me here in Bellingham, but on the other side of the line. The 40th is not a swing district. The 42nd is a swing district. She got over 50 phone calls and hundreds of emails. I got about 10 emails. They're not trying to persuade people how to think on this. They're trying to make people angry, specifically in swing districts. And so really just urge folks to be cognizant of that when you hear about this in public.
Thank you. So Andrea Dahl's got another question or a comment. Andrea, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank everybody first for their well thought out answers. I actually have 2 things, sort of, I hope I can put them together. But one of the things I was very concerned about was reading in the paper that our local hospital, Island Hospital, has about 6 weeks worth of funds left. And that's how desperate it is. It's so desperate. And I'm wondering how our legislators are looking at that and what they think we can do. And then the second part is that I see this virus thing as a opportunity because it has shown cracks in our infrastructure. It's shown cracks in our policies of the past. And I'm hoping that our legislators can come in and say the opportunities that they see and how they might want to see things change. But first, the hospital, if you could.
If I could jump in on that, I just had a briefing with Island Hospital yesterday about it. They've furloughed close to 200 employees. A lot of those folks are on paid time off or paid sick or family leave, which again, thank you Democrats of Washington State for helping provide some safety nets for people. Part of the conversation we've got to have is around how we augment the financial bottom line for hospitals who still had to take massive cuts in voluntary procedures, but did not have enough COVID cases to put them on the list for financial aid. So I think there's going to have to be around Washington State a concerted effort to help the hospitals that didn't have the number of COVID cases necessary, but still, you know, it's a huge percentage of their business that is voluntary procedures. So trying to figure out how to keep them financially solvent. Obviously, we can't survive as a community without a hospital. So there will definitely be some focus. It's not the only hospital for whom that is the case, certainly. So that's something that's been brought to our attention, and we'll have to look both as the federal stimulus dollars continue to trickle in, but also kind of looking to the future of how the state is going to keep those institutions whole.
And thank you, Liz. We've really looked to Liz on the question of Island Hospital and her taking the lead and working so closely with the nurses and protecting them. I remember this summer, Liz, hearing a story how you walked in with the nurses standing on strike and reminding the board in the medical field in Anacortes that they need to be treated fairly. And you've always been a champion on that, and you're a hero there. I wanted to ask the second question on what area are we finding where we can start advancing some of those policies. And I see Jim, who's sitting in his red sweater, who's a wonderful friend of mine, and it's good to see you, but he always reminds me how important healthcare for all is. And one of the questions that have been coming up through Representative Cody, who is a nurse, who served in the state legislature almost 30 years, is now more than ever, are we talking about healthcare for all? What the impact is today during the COVID virus and the impact and what we can be doing better. So Jim, the message that you shared with me when I first came to talk to you in the Anacortes Chamber is still staying after 3 years, and we're not giving up hope on what we can better do to address that at the state level with champions such as Dave and Alex and Liz, but also with folks like you who remind us how important it is and what the loss is if we don't have it. So many of our Washingtonians are fighting to be able to provide and find health care. It was, as we heard, $4,000 to be tested twice without health care for the COVID virus. So it's your voice doesn't go unheard, Jim, and it's good to see you. So with that, I'll see if Dave or Alex want to share a few words.
Yeah, so the Island Hospital and hospitals across our region did the right thing by canceling elective surgeries and keeping people, encouraging the stay-at-home order. That is absolutely the right thing to do. We do not want folks coming in to healthcare system and spreading, potentially spreading the virus. Here on Whidbey Island, Whidbey Health was down even less than Island Hospital. And so I worked with the governor's office and made sure that they knew very well what was going on. And then I think it's the same with Island Hospital. How do we connect them to dollars to help keep them solvent? Because we absolutely have to have these healthcare centers in our communities.
Dustin Johnson is here and has his hand up. Hi, Dustin.
Hi,
Go ahead.
how are you?
Fine. Go ahead with you have a question or a comment?
Well, a touch on both. So first, I just wanted to circle back to something that Representative Paul said. The delegation really went above and beyond for the Family Center and working collaboratively to make sure that we got a very significant gift in the capital budget for the childcare construction of the affordable housing project on 26. So I just want to express my extreme gratitude for that. I feel so blessed to live in a community where we have a delegation that works so closely together and coordinates, because truly I don't think that project would have come together and that proposal would have come together without that cohesion of our group and their ability to work across the aisle and work with other legislators. So thank you for that so much. Secondarily, I was wondering if there have been any additional updates on the any legislation or action that the governor is taking around evictions and moratoriums on mortgage foreclosures. I know that has been the case up until this point. But does there look to be any further action around that? We are seeing a huge spike in domestic violence and in homelessness, especially people that are in service industries and people that are housing insecure, that may not be in formal leases, but might be staying with friends that aren't protected under the same umbrella of a lease. And so the last thing we need is to add on folks that do have legitimate leases getting kicked out of those homes, because I think it would really flood the homelessness system that is already really overburdened, as you know.
I don't see any other hands up yet.
I can jump in at least
Go
in
ahead.
part on that. So if you guys would like to join us, the 40th District Delegation is going to have another Zoom meeting on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. and it is specifically to talk about housing, the eviction moratorium, services that are being put out there for homeless folks. And I'll have special guests, Senator Patty Kuderer and Representative Nicole Macri, who are just absolute powerhouse champions in the housing arena and have a much deeper understanding certainly than I do, although Alex might have something to add since he works on the housing committee.
I was going to say thank you, Liz, for hosting that on Saturday. Representative Macri has joined together with the Senate and sent a letter to the governor expanding the moratorium for renters, but also there are a couple other elements there, Dustin, that's going to help relieve the rent and the situation for many of our community members. There's also a conversation happening for renters relief for migrant farmers who are also facing some of the lowest pay, but they're also being impacted by a lot of the situation that we're in, and they're essential workers. I was gonna also, one of the things that the 40th did from the Skagit all the way up to Blaine, and Dustin, you were part of this, is we provided funding to the Skagit Oasis Teen Shelter for homelessness, the Skagit Boys and Girls Club, and then also Opportunities Council. So we made sure that our teens and our youth were taken care of during this homeless situation. And it was actually past Speaker Frank Chop who collaborated across the state to make sure that our teens and our youth had funding and a place to go and a shelter to go to. So your whole entire team partnered up. I don't know if Alex, you want to join a little bit into that conversation.
Yeah, I will just add, and forgive me, I haven't actually looked at my legislative email for a few hours, so I anticipate that the governor is going to take some action in the next couple of days, if he hasn't already this afternoon, on housing. The eviction moratorium expires in 2 days, and it's something we've been talking with his office, everybody on the line today, and most of the Democratic caucus has been raising. And that letter that Deborah mentioned is sort of the escalation of that. I anticipate that they're going to take action. I don't know what that will do, but we've asked that it include expansion to include things like folks who are coincidentally evicted for something unrelated to not paying rent, like having a pet that they've had the whole time, those kinds of things. Addressing the challenge for students, like college students who are stuck in leases when college is no longer continuing. We're also looking for a moratorium on foreclosures for folks in mortgages who are having challenges paying there. And significant action for folks experiencing homelessness, because we know that population is particularly at risk. But I don't have anything to be able to update you on what that's going to include. Knock on wood, we'll be able to fill you in on Saturday morning at the town hall that Senator Loveland mentioned.
I think it's important that, you know, when we got to the legislature, and I'm sorry, dogs are barking, you know, I think a lot of folks in King County and Pierce County and some parts of Snohomish County just thought this was a Metro Seattle issue, and it's not. And I think bringing our voices to the legislature in explaining that housing insecurity and housing affordability is central to Skagit and Island and Whatcom counties, I think was critically important. Certainly, that is part of our weekly phone call with House leadership of how can we help protect folks that are the most vulnerable right now.
Don't see any hands up right now. Anybody else have another question? Oh, here comes the hand. Bradley. And Dean Scott. How about Dean Scott?
Up this.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I thought I might just start out by asking, I wondered how many of you get emails and phone calls and letters and texts from infants and toddlers. Probably you don't. And my name's Callista Scott, and I was volunteering at the food bank. I'm a retired maternity nurse, and I noticed mothers were looking for diapers. And I went to school at UW and was quite interested in human development, and I recall the Joint Commission on the Health of Children saying that what is most important is human development and the environment in which children live. And I started looking into this diaper need problem, and we found out that 1 in 3 families struggle to afford to buy enough diapers to diaper their babies. And WIC, there's no federal entity that provides diapers for babies. Also, I have been donating diapers at WIC through our diaper bank. And I found out that parents get so much formula, but they don't get all they need. And I think formula is about $10. I'm not sure. It's pretty expensive a can, price per can. So right now, we are addressing the needs of 500 children at WIC in Mount Vernon. And we've been able to get quite a bit of money through fundraising, and we're going to try to help with the COVID, during the COVID time. Can you still hear me?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so we look at this concern about education, and I think we need to start with the relationship between the mother and the baby, and have babies have their basic needs met. This makes the mom happy. Then the relationship can go along quite like it's supposed to. And I know we hear a lot about getting books for babies because they don't have many, and I'm all for that, but they need their diapers first and they need their food. And so I think I'll just kind of leave it at there if you have any questions. Or
Any comments on that, panelists?
Green.
The very first, oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Yes,
I don't know
Jim,
how
go.
to, yeah, Green, I didn't sign in soon enough, so I'm not sure I'm a participant. But the other day when I got my,
Yes, you are.
oh, good, that's great.
There's your name. It just came up.
Good. The other day I got my census thing, and it said, am I an Indian? Am I an American? Am I a black person? Am I a Spanish person? Am I a white person? And those labels are all fake names. They don't mean anything. If we've labeled Trump as a black man and Obama as a white man, we've had a different situation. What's going on? Names like that are fictions of our imagination and our policy to things and how we react to people. I was brought up on the East Coast, and a Spanish person is no problem for me. A black person I have to think about every time I see him. And that's because we try and label them, and it clearly doesn't work on Obama, and it certainly doesn't work on expectations from our labels that are very different. My uncle taught school and went to Harvard, graduates in teaching in the 60s. And I asked him, I said, what did you learn? And he said, we don't start soon enough. And I think what we have to deal with here and what's going on right now in this world is we've got to start thinking about a new radical way of teaching kids and teaching them when they're 1 to 3, 4 to 4 and 5. And by that time, it gets to be too late. I think that's true. And I'm asking each of you people that volunteered to talk to us, what radical changes are we going to make? The Republicans made a radical change. Electing, they didn't. They lost by 3 million votes, but they didn't figure out how to win the presidency. What radical things are we going to do that are going to make us have a situation where we have schools that are radically different and we are teaching our kids? Because I think that's where it starts, and we're not starting soon enough. We have new programs now we're proud of, but it's more than kindergarten. It's got to be below kindergarten before we start working on people. They understand what it means to be a human being, but we're all human beings.
Yes.
No label for any one of us.
Yes. And it starts in a mother's arms too, a father's arms too, talking to the babies and giving them what they need, their basic needs. I agree with you. Mm-hmm.
There's a conversation that was had, and this is Representative Lukanoff. My very first meeting that I had when I showed up in Olympia was going down to a meeting on early education. And I think you'll appreciate this. Representative Tana Sims and Representative Christina Reeves really led that fight during that time. And they reminded us that the children begin in the womb, the teaching begins in the womb, and the mothers need help and the mothers need assistance. And if we're gonna invest in Washington State and what our world looks like 30 years from now, it's investing early on and helping those mothers and those fathers cultivate and educate their children while the baby is still connected to the mother before the baby's born. And so Governor Inslee, along with the state legislature, really started promoting early education and providing services that help the mothers. We had women, aunties, grandmothers, roles that came in and helped the mothers grow into their motherhood and grow and teach the children while they're still in the womb. That's very much part of Washington State's values today. I think we'll also find that there are TANF programs, there are wraparound services for families, low-income families, no matter what color you are, that really help enhance the children, the mothers, the growth, how to take care of the children, how to provide diapers, how to provide WIC. And Senator Loveland talked about this summer championing how to provide, increasing the funding for good, healthy foods, such as farm foods in farm markets. And I'll let her speak to that a little bit. There's a conversation to be had for both of my friends who spoke today. Childhood begins within the mother's womb. Early education is an investment for Washington State. Growing that collectively together is honorable, it is respectable, but it also makes sure that education is one of the #1 priorities if we're going to have a strong workforce development 30 years from now, which promotes taxpayers, which promotes communities, which cultivates culture. Again, Jim, no matter what color you are, every one of us deserve an education, and it starts early on and investing then. So I'll pause there and go back to my colleagues.
I'll jump in with a couple of notes. Thank you for both of those questions. I would, first thing to just mention, Representative Deborah Entenman led the charge this year on temporary assistance for needy family. And we made the investment to bring the state's budget for that assistance for in many cases, single parents, young children, back up to where it had been before the last recession, just in time for what's likely in front of us now. But that's on the order of $15 million per year investment in that assistance. Representative Sharon Shoemake led the charge in the House for early education bill that reduces barriers. Dustin Johnson may be able to jump in and tell us more about some of the lived experience of dealing with those barriers, but red tape around licensing and managing early childhood education programs. We know there's a desperate need for those. And we know that getting education for folks, for kids in preschool age is one of the best investments we can make in all kinds of outcomes for folks' lives. Jim, thank you for the reminder of the importance of completing the census. And I really wish that we were at a different place where it didn't matter the color of your skin or your ethnic background. Unfortunately, the reality is we know that when we measure those things, we find out the generational poverty that's tied to race and tied to who your parents and grandparents were still leads to disproportional outcomes in all kinds of things, like health, like educational attainment. Even right now, we're finding that Black and brown communities in the United States are more likely to be exposed to COVID-19. And so it's important that we keep collecting that data, and it's important that we respond to that data. And that's why I was proud to vote for, and I think everybody on the line here voted to create Washington State's Office of Equity this year, to create a central hub where that information can be gathered and we can systematically start to address or continue to address those inequities.
Thank you. Okay, 2 hands are up now. We have Carol Sullivan here from Mount Vernon, and then after Carol, Patty has another question. Hi, Carol.
Hi there. Am I unmuted? I'm just going to.
Yes, you are.
I sent this to Corinne, but I wanted to share this. This has to do with education and data. I was glad Alex mentioned that, because you people in the 40th district, can you see all that green that's right here?
Mm-hmm.
Look, all the yes votes on legislation that's over here. You're not going to be able to read the numbers, but just know that bills, there were about 23 that the Coffee and Cards group followed. And I just love to see all that green. The brown means it didn't, it died it died until next year. Here's the 10th, oh, thank you. And here's the 10th district. Look at that nice range of green there. That's Dave's vote. You can see where he had to be excused to be out of in the hospital. But here's what I really would wish we could change is all this red in the 39th district. And occasionally Representative Eastlick votes for some green things, but they vote for some very easy things that don't really have much teeth in them. This is just a real visual way for me to keep track of what's happening in the legislature as I learn more and more about it as I go along. But wow, I love this District 40. Thank you so much to those to the 3 of you, and then to Representative Paul as well for keeping green. I like red as color, but certainly not voting no for things that mean a lot to our communities. Thank you, Corinne.
And Carol, you call it the what scorecard?
Legislative scorecard.
Legislative scorecard. Thank you for, you're so creative.
That's debatable. But we couldn't follow everything, but we followed things that made a difference, and there was some method to the madness. There were, whoops, upside down is not method. Green were environmental. These were dealing with elections. The orange was for gun prevention. Housing was in brown, and I think we only followed one health bill, and we need somebody next year to follow education. But it's a real experience to see visually how the 3 districts that represent Skagit County show up so different when you take into account how people actually vote. What they say might be one thing, but how they vote, shows you.
I
Thank you.
guess my problem is we need to have some kind of a non-labeling system of identifying people who were brought up in Mexico, came across on those wetbacks. Maybe we call them that or something. And if you're a Black person, obviously the same label can't apply to Obama as to Trump. And so how do we get rid of the labels that put people in boxes? It's one of the problems that we perpetuated in our census taking, it seems to me. Sorry about my voice. Don't talk much during the day and it doesn't get a lot of exercise. Thanks.
And-
I'll get off the line.
And Jim, when you want to make a comment or a question, click on participants. I explained this before you came in.
Yeah, okay.
So
yeah,
you don't know. Click on participants, and then the list of names comes up on the right. And at the bottom, there's raise hand. See that blue hand? Well, you probably haven't done it yet. But anyway, look for that raise hand to click on, and then that brings you up.
There we go. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I came in late. That was a problem.
And then there will be a hand symbol by your name, and then I can know that you have
Okay, great.
a comment and call on you.
Sorry to
Okay.
bother 32 other people in my head.
Okay, panelists, do you have a comment or on Jim's remarks or on the legislative scorecard from Carol?
I was hoping to jump back to the legislative scorecard, and it seemed like a good transition. If I can hijack the agenda for one moment, Corinne. I saw Susan Woodard is on the call and wondered if we wanted to give her a couple of minutes to talk about how one more of those columns could be green next year.
She doesn't have her hand up. Let's wait for that and see if she does. Patty Santangelo, you have another comment? Your hand's still up. Question?
Yes. I was wondering on the housing Zoom meeting on Saturday, are you planning to invite the Skagit County Coalition for the Homeless members, or at least their chair from Mount Vernon?
Please feel free to pass information on. I was just texting my LA to see if I could post a link here in the chat, but I know it's on my official Senate Facebook and should be on the webpage as well. So you can share that link with anybody that you think would want to get involved. And then if there's additional follow-up that we need to do around local efforts, I'm happy to follow up with anybody who has additional questions, comments, or concerns.
Yeah. And one other comment.
Maybe for Corinne, maybe you'd be able to share it through the Representative or Senator Lovelet's link through your Fidalgo Democrats chain.
Yes, I'll do that.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
And after the social distancing comes off for a while, there is a simulation called COPE, the Cost of Poverty Experience. And if you have not done it, please try to get it. I'd love to bring one to Anacortes. I still have not been able to do it. When I moved here 10 years ago, I had done it back in Iowa, and so I asked them to do it here. And it took quite a few years and the leadership experience group to get the $1,000 program to get it here and the training. But it really gives other people an idea of the struggles that the homeless have or poverty causes. That's it. The volunteer center.
And I see that my my dinner dates have arrived.
So you're going to leave the meeting.
I'm going to have dinner now.
Okay.
I just wanted to wrap up and say that, of course, any follow-up questions, any comments, any concerns, you guys know how to get a hold of me. I am still in the phone book. So anybody who needs to get a hold of me can reach out anytime. As was mentioned earlier, our staff is just incredible. They have been the front door on our offices and really just trying to help people get matched up to the resources that they need moving forward, and trying to answer as many questions and help direct them to with whatever whichever agency is going to be helpful moving forward. So that is going to stand. And as we mentioned before, we'll be sure to get that invite out for the housing meeting on Saturday.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for coming and joining us.
Absolutely.
And enjoy your dinner. We'll let you go, and we'll go
I
on with.
will. I just heard it go beep, so I'm going to pull it out of the oven.
Okay.
All right.
So,
thank you, you guys.
all right. And we've got a question from Andrea Dahl, so we'll go to that next. Andrea, are you still there?
Yeah, I am. Thank
Here
you.
she is.
Yeah. You know, when I was in Alaska, I would visit prisons as part of my job there. And I would notice that in rooms, there could be like 100 inmates inside of one single room. And I understand that this is a tremendous security problem with the virus. But when I read in the paper today that the governor was going to release thousands of inmates, I have to say that I also had my own security problem about wondering how he was going to do this and how, what was the approach to bringing thousands into the state. And I wonder if anybody has any kind of approach on that, any of the legislators.
Good question.
We just got a great update on that from Representative Goodman, who's the chair of the committee and was himself touring the Monroe facility last week. The Monroe facility, for those that weren't following this closely, it was the one last week where there was, 10 or 12 days ago now, where there was a security incident, prisoners, low minimum security facility, but folks were sort of refusing to go back to quarters, very concerned about their own health, and really helped sort of elevate this nonviolent protest at the prison. So the governor's order comes after a Supreme Court ruling last week, and we have to wait to find out whether what the governor called for yesterday is going to actually meet the Supreme Court's requirements. It is allowing up to 950 inmates in state facilities to be released. All of these folks are nonviolent offenders. Nobody who's in for violent offenses is going to be released. These are predominantly folks with property-related crimes or DUIs who are ultimately the overwhelming majority of these are folks whose crimes likely relate to substance abuse problems. I don't recall the numbers exactly, but the biggest categories of groups of folks who are being released, folks with less than 2 months to go on their sentence are having the remaining 2 months commuted. And then folks who are eligible, again, nonviolent only, and for whom there's already sort of a plan for eventual release or discussion about what parole would look like, will be able to continue serving their time from home with an ankle bracelet and supervision. So it's certainly something that folks are concerned about, the potential for recidivism, but I think it likely threads the needle pretty well of protecting people's lives and health, and keeping our citizens safe.
Thank you for that. So that answers that question. Anybody else have a comment on that issue? No? Okay. Representative Paul, you don't need to put your hand up because you're on the panel. Go ahead.
Seemed like the polite thing to do.
I knew you were being polite.
So I've got to go here in a few minutes, but I just wanted to remind folks, we have 4 folks that this is their first or second term of the legislature. I think a lot of times in life, it takes the second or third time to do something to really start to perfect it. And I am really excited about what the 4 of us can accomplish next year with some experience under our belt. And
I learn something every day in a legislature. One of the things I look forward to working on is getting to know my Senate colleagues even better. And I think as you learn to get things through the House, now we're learning how to connect with somebody in the Senate that's scrambled to get your work through in the Senate, and the more work we can do to build those relationships, over the last 2 years is only going to help us next term. So I'm really excited to come back and what we can accomplish, the four of us can accomplish for our community with a couple of years under my belt. And then selfishly, I almost always have one of my kids with me. I'd like to introduce Beth. I think some of you have met Beth before, and she's my campaign manager. And she could be doing almost anything tonight, but she has been sitting here listening and being engaged with politics, and I just think that's terrific.
So
good to meet you, Beth.
David, before you go, if you don't mind, Corinne, I really want to tip my hat here to Dave. Dave, you have always been a courageous, a very thoughtful, and one of those representatives who sit in our House caucus room and raises those questions that we really need to be thoughtful of as we make those decisions. David's humble. He has done an incredible job on representing veterans, workforce development, elders, our healthcare system. Dave, you've been fair, you've been balanced. You also find a good table to sit at that finds unified decisions that really represent your district, but you always remember the 40th, you always remember the 39th, and you reach up to the 42nd, and we appreciate you. And Corinne, if we find an opportunity to really stand up Representative Paul and really acknowledge and support him in this race, I'm 110% behind him. We're with you, Dave, and anything you might need, please feel free to call upon us, because we'll stand with you at any day, any place, anytime.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we really need lots of Democrats in the 10th. So thank you so much for joining us, Dave Paul. Now, before we conclude, I'd like to invite Suzanne Woodard, whom Representative Lekanoff mentioned. She hasn't raised her hand, but if you're still here, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself and tell just for a minute about your candidacy, because we've got, 37 people or so here, and they haven't all met your acquaintance yet.
I think Suzanne went for dinner as well.
Oh, she's gone. That's why I don't see her name anywhere.
I don't mind saying a few words for her, Corinne.
Okay, Corinne.
Corinne, I'm sorry. I fully have endorsed Suzanne in my campaign. I think she's a wonderful candidate. She really represents the district well. She's a voice that comes from union, community. She understands economic development, prosperity, homelessness, and education. What she really understands too is small business. So if we find an opportunity to have any type of outreach with her for the Fidalgo Dems, I think she is very much an investment, as you invested in Alex and I, and Liz and Dave.
She did come and speak to our group for a few minutes. Tell the folks what she's running for. Not everybody knows.
She's running in the Senate position, and she's running as a Democrat, and she is a nurse that comes out of the unions. That really is part of the conversation that we need to address in the upcoming 2021 legislative session.
Thank you. Now, Kurt Huber has his hand up, and he's associated with Representative Dave Paul. Kurt.
Well, I'm glad to be volunteering with Dave again in this election cycle. But I want to get back to Carol's great visual chart there. And, just thinking about the 10th legislative district, besides re-electing Dave and keeping all those votes that show up as green under Dave's name, we've got Helen Price Johnson running for the state Senate, and she's a great candidate and has a strong opportunity there. And so anything we can do to support her. And then we've got 4 people running in the primary to take Norma Smith's position, since Norma's running again. So, I think we can really change that chart in the 10th. When I think about it, in 2018, we had 3 Republicans, and now we've got Dave in there and a strong possibility of just flipping the whole district in a matter of 2 years, and just a great opportunity to kind of change the whole perspective here in our area.
That's really interesting. Having Norma Smith run and hold that position, she has so much seniority in the representatives and Democratic parties that I think Suzanne could really step into that role. Davis stepped in and took control of workforce development and education in our House. I think we're going to do great in the North.
Great, thank you so much. Anybody else? I think that's all the hands that I see. So I think it's run its course and we'll conclude. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It's been great. And bye.
Corinne, thanks for organizing this as always. Bradley, thank you for your help behind the scenes.
My pleasure.
And also Jeremy Harrison Smith was behind the scenes also on the Skagit Dems Zoom team. Thanks to Jeremy too. And all the participants who came. If we were meeting in person, we would all burst into applause. That's what we always do. And I consider there's an applause thing here, but we thought, there's Jeremy.
Thank you. Thanks, Corinne.
Now we should take a moment.
Use it.
We really should take a moment and enjoy Deborah's sunset. Look at that. Isn't that just
awesome.
Glorious? Thanks for sharing, Deb.
Yeah, thanks for letting us into your home, all of you. And hopefully you will have an opportunity to join Fidalgo Democrats next meeting. It'll be Tuesday, May 12th at 7 o'clock, again on Zoom. Okay, good night.